He grabbed the microphone right out of the MC's hand, pointed across the ballroom at me, and said, "Could someone please remind the maintenance staff that the service entrance is around back?" 200 people laughed. My son's face went the color of concrete, and I just stood there in my old gray flannel shirt, holding a glass of sparkling water, thinking one thing: he has absolutely no idea. Let me back up. My name is Walter. I am 64 years old. I drive a 2009 Ford F-150 with a crack in the passenger side mirror that I've been meaning to fix for 3 years. I own 2 pairs of dress shoes, and I only wear them to funerals. I get my hair cut at the same barbershop I've been going to since 1987, and I tip $8, because that's what a haircut cost when Earl first picked up his scissors, and I've never seen a reason to change what works. My late wife used to say I dressed like a man who had already won and didn't need to prove it anymore. I took that as the highest compliment she ever gave me, and she gave me many. My son, I'll call him my son throughout this because that's what he is. The only title that matters, built a software company from a laptop on our kitchen table when he was 26. I watched him do it. I watched him eat cereal for dinner because he couldn't afford groceries and a server subscription at the same time. I watched him call investors who hung up on him, pitch to rooms that didn't listen, get told no so many times that the words stopped having weight. He never once complained about any of it. That's the thing about my son. He has his mother's jaw and his mother's stubbornness, and her absolute refusal to accept that a closed door means stop walking. What my son didn't know, and what I made very sure he didn't know for a long time, was that the anonymous seed investment that kept his company alive during that second year, the $420,000 that came through a holding LLC called Stormlight Capital, was mine. I had spent 31 years building a regional logistics company, sold it quietly in 2018, and I had money sitting in accounts that I had no interest in spending on myself. My son was pouring everything he had into something real, something good, and I was not going to let it die because of a cash flow gap. But I also was not going to hand it to him and let him think he hadn't earned it. So I did it through a legal structure, a handshake with my attorney, and a promise to myself that I would tell him eventually. Just not yet. I want to be clear. My son built that company. Every line of code, every client relationship, every sleepless quarter that was him. I gave him the oxygen to keep breathing long enough to do it. There is a difference, and I have always known the difference, even if no one else did. By the time his company hit 31 employees and a partnership deal with a regional hospital network, my son had connected with a man I will call his business partner. His business partner came from old Charleston money, the kind of family that puts their last name on buildings and considers that philanthropy. He was 51, wore suits that cost more than my truck, and he had a daughter my son had been seeing for about 14 months. She was perfectly pleasant when she was not standing next to her father. When she was standing next to her father, she became a different person. Quieter, smaller, a candle in a draft. My son's business partner was the kind of man who assessed every room he walked into and ranked the people in it. I learned this about him at the first dinner we shared, a Sunday evening at a steakhouse downtown where the menus had no prices. He looked at my flannel shirt, my rubber-soled shoes, my hands, which are the hands of someone who spent years loading and unloading freight before he could afford to pay other people to do it. And he made a calculation. I watched him do it. It took about 4 seconds. Then he smiled the smile of a man who has decided you are not a factor in the equation and went back to talking to my son. I didn't say anything. I ordered the ribeye medium, listened to 2 hours of conversation about growth projections and term sheets, and a gala event his business partner was organizing to announce the company's new funding round, and I went home and told my dog about it. My dog's name is Ruckus. He's a 9-year-old basset hound and an excellent listener. Over the next several months, I noticed a pattern. When my son's business partner referenced the company, he spoke as though my son were a talented employee rather than the founder. When he spoke about the upcoming funding round, an $8 million Series A led by a venture capital firm called Meridian Group, he used the word "we" in ways that slowly crowded my son to the edge of the sentence. And when he spoke about the Gala, the event he was single-handedly organizing at the Harcourt Hotel downtown, he spoke about it the way a man speaks about something he owns. The Harcourt Hotel is a 1,924 building on the corner of 5th and Meridian Street, the same Meridian Street the VC firm was named after, which I always found either coincidental or deliberate. It has a grand ballroom with 22-foot ceilings, the original plasterwork, and floors that were relaid in 1998, with reclaimed pine from a mill in eastern Tennessee. I know all of these details because I purchased the building in 2019 through a real estate holding company called Ironwood Properties, LLC. I bought it because my financial advisor told me commercial real estate in that corridor was undervalued, and because I liked the building, and because I had no earthly use for another vacation home. The management company I contracted to operate the Harcourt handled everything. I did not attend ribbon cuttings. I did not have my name on a plaque. I deposited the quarterly statements into a folder on my desktop and thought about them twice a year. The general manager knew my name. The ownership records were public if anyone thought to look. No one thought to look. When my son told me his business partner had booked the Harcourt ballroom for the gala, I sat with that information for a moment. Then I asked what the rental rate was. My son said his business partner had negotiated a special rate and was covering the venue cost personally as a gesture of goodwill toward the company. I said that was generous. I did not say anything else. My son asked me to attend the gala. He said he wanted me there. He said it in the way he used to ask me to come to his wrestling matches in high school, not with the expectation that I would, but with the hope that I might, and the absolute certainty that I would understand if I didn't. I told him I'd be there. He looked relieved in a way that made me wish I had been clearer about that from the start. The night of the gala, I put on dark slacks, a white dress shirt, and the gray flannel shirt over it, untucked. My son had gently suggested I might want to wear a jacket. I told him I had a jacket in the truck. He did not look reassured. The Harcourt ballroom was beautiful that night. The management team had done an exceptional job with the floral arrangements, the lighting, the layout of the room. There were 212 guests, according to the RSVP count I had seen in a routine management email earlier that week. Round tables with white linens, a stage at the front, a cocktail reception running along the east wall. I arrived at 7:15, 15 minutes after the doors opened, and I got myself a glass of sparkling water and stood near the back wall where I could see the whole room. My son found me about 10 minutes in. He shook my hand and then pulled me into a hug, the kind that lasts an actual second longer than a greeting hug should, and I thought about his mother. He introduced me to 3 or 4 people as my father, and each time he said it, there was something in his voice, a pride, that sat underneath the words, like a foundation sits underneath a house. You don't see it, but everything rests on it. His business partner found us around 7:45. He was in a charcoal suit with a pocket square that matched his cufflinks, and he had the polished ease of a man who had attended hundreds of events like this and considered them all slightly beneath him. He shook my son's hand warmly, clapped him on the shoulder, said something about a big night. Then he looked at me. I had met him perhaps 6 times at this point. Each time, I watched the 4-second calculation happen. Each time, the result was the same. "Walter," he said. He had never once called me sir, and he had never once called me Mr. Crane, and he had never once asked me what I did before I retired, though he had asked my son this question about me once, within my earshot, in a tone that suggested the answer would be either mildly amusing or irrelevant. My son had told him I'd been in logistics. His business partner had nodded the way people nod when they are already thinking about the next thing they want to say. "Good to see you," I told him. "Glad you could make it," he said, with the emphasis on could that implied it was a charity of sorts, my being there. Then he excused himself to go speak to the Meridian Group partners who had just arrived near the stage, and I watched him cross the room with the confidence of a man who believed the whole evening was an extension of his own personality. The program started at 8. There were introductions, a brief video about the company, remarks from 2 of the hospital network executives who had partnered with my son's platform. My son gave a speech that lasted 9 minutes and was completely without notes. He talked about what the company was built to do, reduce the administrative gap between patient discharge and outpatient care coordination, which sounds technical until you hear the stories, and my son told one story about a 71-year-old veteran in a rural county who had been discharged from a hospital after a cardiac event and fallen through the follow-up gap for 11 days until his neighbor called 911. My son said he built the company so that gap would close. He didn't say it loudly. He said it the way you say something that is simply true. There were people in that room wiping their eyes. I was one of them, and I am not ashamed of that. Then his business partner took the stage. He spoke for 14 minutes. He spoke about vision and scale and the runway that serious capital creates. He spoke about his own experience in business development. He used the word we 23 times, and I counted because I had nothing else to do with my hands, and it helped me stay calm. He announced the Meridian Group investment. He held up a framed term sheet, the way a man holds up a trophy. The room applauded. He thanked his daughter for her patience and grace. He did not mention my son's name in the final 3 minutes of his remarks. I had moved toward the back of the room during the speeches because I could see better from there, and because I prefer walls at my back in large crowds. I was standing near the service corridor entrance, which had a small brass sign next to it, and a door that was slightly ajar because one of the catering staff had propped it open to move trays more efficiently. I will admit, standing closer to that door than to any table. His business partner stepped off the stage to more applause. Then, as the room began to shift back into cocktail mode and the MC moved to make a housekeeping announcement, his business partner walked past the general area where I was standing. He stopped. He looked at me. He looked at the service door. He looked at my flannel shirt. And then he did it. He took 2 steps toward the MC, reached out and took the microphone with a smooth, practiced motion. The motion of a man who has never once worried about whether he has the right to take something, and he turned toward the back of the room with a wide, performing smile, and said, loudly, into a live microphone in a ballroom with 200 people who had just gone quiet for housekeeping announcements. Could someone please remind the maintenance staff that the service entrance is around back? We have guests who might be confused. There was laughter. Not all of it, but enough. The nervous, reflexive kind that fills a room when something has just happened that people haven't quite processed. I saw my son's head snap around from across the room. I saw his face. I want to tell you about his face, because it is important. It was not embarrassed. It was not confused. It was the face of a man watching something he cannot stop and cannot forgive, and the grief on it was the most painful thing I saw that entire evening. I did not move. I did not change my expression. I picked up my sparkling water from the high-top table beside me, and I took a slow, deliberate sip. His business partner handed the microphone back, still smiling, and the room began to murmur back to life with the particular energy of people who are collectively deciding how to feel about what they just witnessed. My son was crossing the room. I could see him coming. I could see the conversation he was about to have with his business partner, could see the fracture it was going to create, could see everything that was at stake for the company and the investment and the partnership and his relationship with the man's daughter, all of it. I had about 30 seconds before he reached us. I held up one hand when he was about 10 feet away. Just the hand. He stopped. He looked at me. I shook my head once, slowly. He stood there for a moment, jaw tight, and then he did one of the hardest things a person can do, which is trust someone else's judgment in a moment when every instinct is screaming at you to act. He stayed where he was. His business partner was accepting congratulations from a cluster of guests near the stage. I set down my glass and walked across the room toward him. I walked slowly. I have learned over 64 years that how you move in a room tells people something before you've said a word, and I wanted to tell him something specific. I touched him lightly on the arm. He turned. Whatever he expected, it wasn't the expression on my face, which was the expression I have used in every serious business conversation I have had for the last 30 years. Patient, level, completely unreadable. When you get a moment, I said quietly, I'd like to introduce you to someone. He blinked. I'm sorry? The building manager, I said. I believe he'd like to say hello. He looked at me the way people look at a sentence that doesn't parse. The building manager. This is a beautiful venue, I said. I have always liked this room. The plasterwork is from 1924. They don't do that work anymore. I paused. I own it. The calculation happened again. But this time it took longer than 4 seconds. I'm sorry, he said. You own the Harcourt Hotel since 2019 through Ironwood Properties. I said it the way I would say I take my coffee black. A simple, established fact. Your venue rental contract is with my management company, which means the special rate you negotiated very reasonable. By the way, Marcus is a skilled negotiator. That rate came from my side of the table. He was very still. I also want to introduce myself properly, I said, since we've met several times and I don't believe we've managed it yet. I held out my hand. Walter Crane. Stormlight Capital. I watched it land. I watched his eyes move to my son across the room, then back to me. Then to somewhere in the middle distance where he was running numbers very quickly and not liking the sum. Stormlight, he said. Seed round, series angel, 2 subsequent bridge notes, I said pleasantly. I've been on the cap table since your partner was eating cereal for dinner and running his company off a kitchen table, which, incidentally, was my kitchen table. There is a specific quality to the silence of a man who has just understood that he has been catastrophically wrong about something for a very long time. It is different from regular silence. It has a texture to it, a density, like the air before a storm when the pressure drops and everything goes still, and even the birds stop talking. His business partner stood in that silence for a moment. The Meridian Group, I said, keeping my voice low and even, because this was not a performance, and I was not interested in a scene, knows my name. I've known Richard Alcott for 11 years. We sat on the same advisory board for a Children's Hospital Foundation in 2016. I haven't said anything to Richard tonight. I paused. I haven't decided yet whether I need to. He looked at me. For the first time since I had met this man, the calculation was not happening. There was nothing to calculate. I did not come here tonight to cause a problem. I told him, and I meant it. I came here because my son asked me to come, and because he has built something that is genuinely worth celebrating, and because I am proud of him in ways I probably haven't told him often enough. That is why I am in this room. I held his gaze steadily. I would like the rest of the evening to be about that. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then he said, very quietly, I didn't know. No, I said, you didn't. I left him standing there and walked back toward my son. My son met me halfway. He had been watching the whole exchange from across the room, and he looked like a man who has just seen something he doesn't entirely have the vocabulary for yet. He pulled me aside near the windows, away from the nearest cluster of guests, and he said, very low, Dad, what just happened over there? I introduced myself, I said. He stared at me. Stormlight Capital. Yes. The silence between us was not like his business partner's silence. This one was full of things. Full of the kitchen table and the cereal dinners and the phone calls I never made to him while he was fighting to keep his company alive, because I didn't want him to know the life raft was his. Father's, full of his mother, who had been gone 4 years, and who had known about Stormlight Capital, and had told me to tell him, and whom I had told I would, eventually. The whole time, my son said. It wasn't a question, most of it. He put his hand over his mouth. He looked away, toward the windows, out at the city. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back and he said, Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to know you built it, I said. You did build it, every piece of it. I just kept the lights on during one bad winter. That's all a father does, if he's lucky enough to get the chance. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he looked at me, and his jaw was doing the thing his mother's jaw used to do, that tight, held-in thing, when she was trying not to cry in public, and he said, You could have worn a nicer shirt. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had all evening, and it came out of me like something that had been waiting for its moment. We stood there by the windows for another minute, and then my son straightened up and went back to being the founder of his company at his company's gala, because that is the kind of man he is, and I went back to my sparkling water. The rest of the evening shifted in a way that these evenings shift when the center of gravity moves. His business partner rejoined the room, but rejoined it differently, more careful, more measured, with the energy of a man recalibrating every interaction in real time. He was attentive to my son in a way he had not been earlier, almost performatively so, which was worse in a different way, but not my problem to fix. Richard Alcott from Meridian Group found me near the end of the evening, by the bar, with the easy recognition of someone who has done business with you and knows exactly who you are. We shook hands and caught up for about 10 minutes, the way old acquaintances do at events, nothing heavy, nothing transactional, just the genuine pleasure of talking to someone you respect. Before he left, he said, "Your son gave a hell of a speech tonight." I told him I agreed. Richard said, "The company's solid, Walter. The fundamentals are real." I thanked him. He looked at me for a moment and said, "He's like you. Doesn't need the room to know it." That landed somewhere I didn't entirely expect it to. I left the gala at 10:15, before the formal close. I said goodnight to my son, who held my hand for a moment longer than necessary when he shook it, which is something he hasn't done since his mother's funeral. I told him to call me in the morning. He said he would. He did the next day at 7:42, before I had finished my first cup of coffee. That conversation lasted an hour and 40 minutes. I will not report all of it here, because some things belong only to the people in them, and my son and I are entitled to the privacy of our own reckoning. But I will tell you that I told him the full story of Stormlight Capital, from the decision I made at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a spreadsheet, to the conversation with my attorney, to every bridge note and every quiet board observer seat I had held without his knowledge. I told him about his mother's role in it, that she had known and supported it, and pushed me, more than once, to come clean. I told him I had no good reason for waiting as long as I did, except that I am a man who grew up being told that the only thing worse than needing help was letting someone see you need it, and I applied that belief to my son in a way that served me more than it served him, and I was sorry for that. He was quiet for a while after that. Then he said, "She knew. From the start, she never said a word to me. She knew how to keep a secret when she believed in one," I said. "She believed in this one." There was a long pause on the line. I heard him exhale. Then he said, "I keep thinking I'm done missing her, and then something like this happens." "I know," I said. "Me too." In the weeks that followed, a number of things resolved themselves. The Meridian Group completed their investment. My son's company received the full $8 million. The term sheet held. The business fundamentals, as Richard had said, were real, and real fundamentals do not typically collapse because of social dynamics at a gala, however dramatic those dynamics may feel in the moment. My son's business partner requested a meeting with me. He came to my house, which I don't believe he had ever visited, and which I suspect surprised him not because it is shabby, but because it is simply a house, a 3-bedroom colonial on a quarter-acre lot in a neighborhood where people have lived for 30 years and know each other's dogs by name. He sat at my kitchen table, which is the same table my son ran his company from, and he said what he had come to say. He said he had been wrong. He said it cleanly, without excessive qualification, which I respected. He said that he had made assumptions that night and before that night, and that the assumption he had made about me specifically had led him to behave in a way that had no excuse. He said that to his considerable embarrassment, he understood that the microphone moment had been seen by several Meridian partners, and that Richard Alcott had said something to him afterward that he would not repeat but would not forget. I let him finish. Then I told him what I thought of him, not the summary version, but the full one, the version that had been forming since the first dinner at the steakhouse with the priceless menus. I told him that a man who ranks the people in a room in the first 4 seconds has made a decision to see less of the world than the world contains, and that this is not a personality quirk but a practice, and practices have consequences. I told him that my son was not a talented employee who had gotten lucky with an investor. My son was the architect of something real, built from nothing, and that the primary obligation of every person who had attached themselves to that thing, including me, including him, was to understand that and act accordingly. He sat at my kitchen table, and he heard all of that. He did not argue. To his credit, he did not argue. I told him I had no interest in dismantling the partnership if my son wished to continue it. That was my son's decision, his company, his call. I told him that I would be watching how he treated my son going forward, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. The way you tell someone that the speed limit in a school zone is 25 miles per hour, not because you're a police officer, but because it is the reality of the situation and it seemed useful to be clear about it. He left about 40 minutes later. He shook my hand at the door. His grip was firmer than it had ever been. My son did choose to continue the partnership with amended terms that I will not detail here because they are his business and his alone, but which, he told me, felt considerably more accurate to the actual structure of what they'd built together. His business partner's daughter, who had been mortified by what her father had done at the gala, she had called my son that same night, past midnight, and spoken to him for a long time, turned out, in subsequent months, to be more her own person than I had originally given her credit for. She and my son are still together. She came to my house for Thanksgiving, and she helped me make the pie without being asked, and she laughed at the right parts of the stories I told about my son's childhood, which is a quality I value highly in a person. I told my son something, a few weeks after all of this, that I want to share here because it is the thing I most want to be understood. I did not do what I did at that gala, the quiet conversation, the introduction, the choice not to make a scene because I was being strategic or because I was playing a long game. I did it because it was the right size for the moment. I have spent 64 years learning that there is a right size for every response, and that going bigger than the moment requires is as much a failure as going smaller. His business partner embarrassed himself in front of 200 people. That was consequence enough. What I wanted was not to punish him further. What I wanted was for my son's company to survive and for my son to understand the full truth of how much he had been worth believing in, not just to the market, but to me. When you are the father of someone like my son, you spend a lot of time with a certain kind of love, the kind that sits quietly in the back of the room and hopes it is never needed but prepares anyway. You build your reserves, you keep your name off the plaques. You drive the old truck and wear the flannel shirt and let the room make whatever calculation it wants to make, because you are not there for the room. You are there for one person, and that person already knows exactly who you are. My wife used to say she said a lot of things, and I have been assembling them into a kind of internal library for 4 years now, cataloging and cross-referencing. She used to say that the most powerful thing a person can have is something they don't need to show anyone. She was not talking about money. She was talking about something else entirely, something that does not fit neatly into a term sheet or a cap table or a venue rental agreement. She was talking about the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, that just exists, solid and quiet, and entirely at peace with not being recognized. I think about her saying that in the Harcourt ballroom, standing in my gray flannel shirt by the service door with my sparkling water, while a man with perfect cufflinks pointed at me, and the room laughed. I think about it every time someone underestimates me, which still happens, and which I have decided to receive as a gift rather than an insult. Every time someone sees a 64-year-old man in worn clothing and calculates him as a zero, they have handed me something. They have told me exactly what kind of man they are, clearly and early and completely voluntarily, and that information is worth more than any introduction they could have made. My son called me 2 days ago. It was an ordinary call company stuff, a question about a vendor contract, a brief story about a meeting that made him laugh. At the end, just before he hung up, he said, "Dad." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I just wanted to say thank you for the kitchen table stuff and the other stuff." I said there was nothing to thank me for. He said, "There really is, though." I said, "Okay." He said, "Good night." I said, "Good night." I sat with Ruckus after that, in the kitchen, with the light on over the stove the way my wife always kept it. The same table, the same room, all of it still here, holding the weight of everything that was built on it and everything that is still being built, quietly, without a plaque, without a ballroom announcement, without anyone needing to know whose name is on the deed. That is enough. It has always been enough. I just needed him to know it was his.